Good evening, everyone. We continue our study in the book of First Kings in chapter 18. We ended yesterday in verse 19. And just for a brief recap so that we can connect to our rest of the chapter today, it was at a time when Elijah told King Achav to send and gather. Now, these are two words. Send is to go and send somebody to gather, to collect. To me, all Israel would be all the tribes. And here would be with reference to the northern tribes. And the place of gathering would be Mount Carmel. And together with 450 prophets of Baal, and then 400 prophets of the Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. And so we are told that King Achav were to gather three groups of people. Now, what we can see is the people wasn't required to be gathered because they are all very curious what's happening. And so what King Achav did was to gather his 450 prophets of Baal. It appears that the 400 prophets of the Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table were not brought to the Mount Carmel. Now, for various reasons, people have conjectures whether these 400 were under the protection of Jezebel. And so King Achav was not able to gather them, and they didn't want to come. But no matter what, we see in verse 20, as we continue on, it is, and then, this word so is, and then, Achav sent. It's just not send orders, it's just send the people to among all the sons of Israel to come. And he brought the prophets together at Mount Carmel. And what we did see is later is that these prophets would be the 450 at Mount Carmel. And so now they are on top of Mount Carmel. And just bear in mind, King Achav is of the thinking that there will be something to plead God for rain because there's been no rain for about 3 years. Verse 21 says this, and then Elijah then came near to all the people and said this, how long are you going to struggle between the two choices? If Jehovah is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him. But the people did not answer him a word. Now we need to actually deal with this a little bit because of a little bit of the Hebrew grammar. So first of all, this was Elijah drawing near, so that he approached the people. It says, how long are you going to struggle with the two choices? Now, this word struggle comes from the word uh, pasak. This word pasak means to hop over or to skip over. And that's where we get the word Pesach, the Passover. And so Pasak is given the idea that somebody is, well, I guess you can call it lame on one foot. And then he would have a stick. And so he is hopping on one foot. That's the picture of Pasak. And so this word here is pasak. It is not struggle, but it's pasak, to hop upon two, well, I guess you could say two divided opinions, or uh, two fork in a branch. So you can think of it this way, that there are there is a branch. I think we can draw it this way. And it is a forked branch, right? A forked branch. And so we have an A and we have a B. And so the idea here is, how long are you going to hop between A and B? That's the idea here. This is not struggle, this is an interpretation. This word is really to hop, not to struggle. So the idea is, how long are you going to hop between A and B, between two choices, between the two forks? This is the fork of a stick. This is that picture we are given here. And hence, two choices. It's not even choices, but the idea is two choices. What are the two options that they were given? If Jehovah is Elohim, follow him. So that's the picture. So one side is Jehovah is Elohim. Remember, in Exodus chapter 20, you shall have no other Elohim before Jehovah. This is the choice they have to make. The other is Baal is Elohim. And so Elijah is saying, why are you hopping back and forth? If one is Elohim, follow him. But if it's not Elohim, there's nothing to follow. Now, the reply is not a word. Not a word means they were speechless. They didn't know how to answer Elijah. And this really is an appeal back to the tribes to remember what God told them about, you shall have no other gods to my face. You can't have both. And so you can't be switching back and forth. Whoever is your Elohim, follow, walk after that Elohim. And so in Exodus chapter 20, God says, I am Jehovah, your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So if Jehovah is your Elohim, so walk after Jehovah, or otherwise the other way. So verse 21 gives us this imagery so that we can really be clear that although the English language is about struggling between two opinions, at least the NASB says that, it is really asking them, why are you hopping around? Why are you wasting time? Why aren't you following God, Jehovah, if he is Elohim? So the word Elohim is important because Elohim would be the absolute mighty one, like a king and like God, who will demand the utmost attention. And so that would be the question first to all Israel here. Verse 22 says, and then after that question, there is an and then, Elijah said to the people, the tribes that are there, he tells them, I alone am left as a prophet of Jehovah, while Baal's prophets are 450 men. Now, I don't think there is a need here to say, what about the 100 that Obadiah had protected and kept aside? The intent here is not to show how many prophets of God are in the land, but on Mount Carmel, We are talking about 1 verses 450. That is the question here, to talk about how this event is going to paint out itself or play out itself. And nobody actually knows exactly what is happening here. But as Elijah presented himself, then in verse 23, he reveals, now have them give to us 2 oxen, and have them, the 450 prophets of Baal, choose the 1 ox for themselves, cut it up, place it on the wood, put no fire under it. And then I will prepare the other ox after you have chosen, and I will cut it up and lay it on the wood, and I will not put a fire under it. Now, this is a place to make an offering. And from here, it is beginning to be a bit more clear that Elijah is challenging the 450 prophets to a duel. Now, obviously, this is not the cowboy western where they shoot a pistol, but they are both here going to do exactly the same thing, and it is to prove whose Elohim is true. Verse 24, then, or and then, we have here, and then, after you have prepared it, you call on the name of your Elohim, and I will call on the name of Jehovah. So there is a name, not just God, but Jehovah. So your God would be Baal. And the Elohim who answers by fire, he is Elohim. And so this is the challenge. So the words here are this: and the Elohim who answers by fire, he is Elohim. So why so many Elohim? Because Elohim is both the God and just a God. And the people answered and said, oh, that's a great idea. Now, in the Hebrew, this is a good word. Word, or davar in the Hebrew, means issue, matter, word, problem, idea. It's a very broad word. So that's a good idea. That's a good word. And that is to tell Elijah that the people are supportive. Now, this is an issue of public opinion. And Elijah wants to turn public opinion against Baal, and also to turn them to repent towards God. Verse 25. And then, after saying all this, Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose your ox for yourself, prepare first, because there are so many of you, and then you can call on the name of your God, but put no fire under the ox. So the first choice is offered to the prophets of Baal. And then they took the ox which was given them. They had chosen it, and then it was given to them. So we have to understand they took the ox that they were given after choosing. That is the intent. And they prepared it, cut it up, And they called on the name of Baal from morning until noon. Now understand this word call. This word call is kara. It has a broad meaning. It means to call, give name, call out loud. Now, all of these are good words. This would be to proclaim, recite, invite. But here in this passage, we are given the picture of this word call to be to call out loud. Now, there are situations where you understand kara as to call out loud, to appeal to God to save, to shout out loudly. Now, in the Hebrew language, you don't find people really talking to themselves and having secret conversations. You find that whenever they are in a public display, it will always be a public spectacle of shouting out. And that's what it means. Shouting out the name of Baal, calling Baal to do something. So, oh Baal, answer us. But there was no voice, meaning no sound from heaven, and no one answered. That would be an A and a B. The next one here is, and they limped about the altar which they had made. Now, we have this word here again, limped about. This word is pasak, to hop around the altar. Now, the idea of hop around the altar, you can find that they would actually do it on one leg. Now, it could be on one leg and then skip to another leg. And so that would be a form of hopping around. So it's not hopping just on the same one leg, it could be hopping on the alternate legs. But it is in a form of jumping around and very similar to I guess, the Red Indians that we may have recollection of those old movies. And they would hop around the fire. And here they will hop around the altar which they had made. Now we need to talk about the altar here, that at this point in time, it was forbidden for anyone to have an altar other than the one in Jerusalem. So why did Elijah build an altar here? And according to the commentators, they would say that this is an exception because the prophet of God was dealing with the false prophets, and hence it was necessary to demonstrate it on an altar where an animal is killed. Well, this is not really giving an offering directly, although it has the appearance of an offering. The whole picture here is to demonstrate which Elohim is real. And so the real Elohim will send fire, and the false Elohim has no fire. It is not so much as a tribute to God or one of those offerings. And so if you think hard about it, it is not about replacing the altar in Jerusalem, but very much an exception to demonstrate divine powers so that the people can see for themselves with their own eyes who is God. We find in verse 27, it says, and then at noontime, Elijah started to ridicule them, to mock them. I think this word here is to mock. And Elijah said, call out with a loud voice, louder, since he is Elohim. undoubtedly he's attending to business. Now, this one is interesting in verse 27 that he is attending to business, meaning he's talking. There was something that he is concerned about. He's on the way on a journey. Perhaps he's asleep and will awaken. So let's look at some of these words. The first one is attending to business. It's not quite exactly attending to business. He is attending to issue, some matters. The second one was that he is on the way. Now, this one is not really on the way. He is pursuing a journey. Now, that's one way of looking at it. That he is pursuing someone. The third one is on a journey. Now, this word on a journey, um, I think you would need to understand the euphemism here is to suggest that he is at the toilet or going to do something. So this is that word. It's not on a journey traveling that he's gone. He is going, he's doing something in the toilet. So he's busy, right? Then he is asleep and will wake up soon. And so shout out loud. So this is the way that Elijah is mocking the prophets of Baal. Verse 28. So, and then they cried out with a loud voice. And then interestingly, uh, they they actually gashed themselves, cut themselves according to their customs with knives, with lances, until blood gushed out of them. This appears to be a way to appease Elohim by self-inflicted, well, I guess you can call it self-inflicted pain, by cuts, by bleeding. People are still doing this today, and they are trying to torture themselves in hope that their prayers are answered by God. And so that is their practice according to their customs. Now, the idea of customs here is the way that they have practiced these things according to their ordinances, according to the way they practice their religion. 29, when midday was past, they raved until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice. Now, this idea here is they raved. The word raved literally means they cause themselves to speak like a prophet. And so they were pretending to be how God interacts with a prophet. Now, in this case, many people would see that they thought that this would be a supernatural event. They are able to engage with Baal, speaking in languages and saying things which appears to be very prophetic. And they started doing all this in hope to demonstrate that Baal would be real. And then there was no voice, no one answered, no one paid attention. Now, all these appears to be an A and a B and a C. They said the same thing. When they cause themselves to speak like a prophet, nothing happened. Now, this is interesting because you find that anyone can pretend to be a prophet, but no one can see God do his work. That would be something which is extraordinary and very incredible. We have here in verse 30, when this time came, that it was time for the offering, and then Elijah said to the people, come forward to me, come closer, basically, come closer. And so all the people came forward to him. And then it says here, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. Now, there is no indication that there was any altar on Mount Carmel ever before. And so many people think of this repairing the altar of the Lord appears to be a suggestion that they should now recognize the altar in Jerusalem, which they have abandoned. And by this symbolic gesture, putting up the altar by having stones, that would be an appearance of a repair, rather than to say that there was something that was broken down there, and they were going to just repair and put it back together. Verse 31, and then Elijah took 12 stones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And 12 is a very specific number, corresponding to the number of tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, Israel shall be your name. And this literally represents Israel. And so here, God remembers Israel. And in this case, all Israel. We continue to read, and with stones he built an altar in the name of Jehovah. He made a trench around the altar large enough to hold 2 measures of seed. Now, 2 measures of seed is a lot. It's like 150 cubits. So basically, we just need to understand that the trench itself is big. Trench means the little drain around it. So we can think of it this way as the drain around the altar. It is very big, enough to hold 2 measures of seed, and 2 measures of seed is really about 150 cubits, like the court of the Mishkan. It is that big. In verse 33, we are now told, and then he laid the wood, cut out the ox in pieces, placed it on the wood. So now there was wood, right? Wood on the altar. And then we have pieces of meat, which they cut up and placed on the altar. In verse 34, it says, and then he said, fill 4 large jars with water pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood, and then do it a second time. And they did a second time, and it says, do it a third time. And so they did. And water flowed around the altar. He also filled the trench with all water. So what you can see here is this is all wet. Right? The whole place is wet. And the water they have to bring from somewhere because Mount Carmel is a very fertile place. And so there would be some underground pressurized springs, like the Gihon Spring, that they can fetch water either there along the Mount Carmel or from the base of Mount Carmel where there is a river. And so all of this is very much water. So we are seeing that this is all wet. We continue in verse 36. And then at the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet approached and said, Jehovah, Elohim, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Israel, that would be Jacob. Let it be known today that you are Elohim in Israel, that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. And so, what Elijah is trying to demonstrate is everything that is being done is actually by God, by Jehovah. He is not here to do a supernatural work by himself. Everything that he has done is really by what God wanted him to do. Verse 37, answer me, Jehovah, answer me so that this people may know you, Jehovah, are Elohim, that you have turned their heart back. Now, this idea of turn their heart back is, you can think of it, is causing their heart, causing their heart to return. Now, God doesn't swing their decisions back, but God is using this particular event to lead them to repent. That would be this word here, have caused to turn their heart back. Verse 38, and then the fire of Jehovah fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust, and it licked up the water that was in the trench. Now, a little bit of Hebrew here would be useful. The first thing is the fire of God fell from the skies. Yeah, we need to know where it came from. It didn't come from the ground. It came from the skies. When the fire came, the second word here is consume, ate. Fire, when it touches things, will burn everything up. And it ate the burnt offering, the olah, the wood, and the stones, and the dust. Now, can dust and stone be eaten by fire? Now, what basically you find is that the fire is so hot, and the picture should be given this way: there is fire from heaven, and fire came up, and everything became on fire, and it ate up all this. And so you find that the fire was burning everything, including the altar stones, the dust on the ground, the wood, and the burnt offering. And so this word consume literally means ate. The fire engulfed everything. And then the last word here is this. It licked. This word is licked. It licked up the water that was in the trench. Now, how does it lick up the water in the trench? So we will find that the fire is not burning in the water, but the amount of water became less and less and less, and it dried up. And so this is the idea here. It dried up. That is what it means by lick. So you don't get the picture of fire in the water, but the fire will be on the material that it can burn, on the carbon, on the stones, the silicon, on the meat, on the wood. And all of that was burnt completely, and it was wet, and it was eaten up anyways. And the water that was on the ground in the trench, they were all dried up. Now, if you were there and you see this particular event, verse 39, and then all the people saw this, they fell on their faces, just like how Obadiah fell on his face. This is fear, and this is fear towards the greater. And who is the greater? Well, they declare here, Jehovah, he is Elohim. Jehovah, he is Elohim. And this is what it means by causing their heart to return back to him, by showing them an exceptional event that only the true Elohim can do this. Baal is a false Elohim. After the whole day, nothing happened. But here, when it's all wet, it was all completely consumed, eaten up, that the stone would have been darkened, the ground would have been scorched, the wood is all gone, the meat is all gone. And so that was a supernatural, divine, awesome display, and it showed the people that this was Jehovah. Verse 40. And once this happened, the people were on the side of God and Elijah. And then Elijah said to these people, seize the prophets of Baal, do not let anyone escape. And so they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon. Now, the brook Kishon is here. This is Mount Carmel. Down here, we have a brook. This is Kishon. And that is probably where the water came from as well. And they were slaughtered there. And then all the blood must have drained into the Kishon. Verse 41. Now Elijah said to Achav, what does that mean? It means that at this point in time, we have Achav, and then we have Elijah. Said to Achav, go up and eat and drink, for there is the sound of the roar of rain coming. That would be the indication for Achav to go up to celebrate. Now, from here, you would see that Elijah and Achav may have been reunited. And this was really to tell Achav, it's okay, let's go back and we can celebrate. And so Achav went up to eat and drink, celebrate. But Elijah went up to the top of Carmel. He bent down to the ground and put his face between his knees. Achav went up to eat, and further up on top of Carmel, Elijah was praying. Verse 43, and then he said to his servant, please go and look toward the sea. That would be the Mediterranean Sea. Now, you may not be aware, but this is how basically it looks like. if this was the coastal area, you find that Mount Carmel is actually just by the side here. And Mount Carmel is a mountain that is just hugging the beach, very close to the sea, the Mediterranean. And so anyone here would be able to look towards the sea. And that was what the servant did. So he went up, looked, and said, but there is nothing. Yet Elijah said, go back 7 times. And when he returned the 7th time, he said this, behold, a cloud as small as a person's hand is coming up from the sea. And Elijah said, go up and tell Achav, get ready your horses and chariot, go down because the rain is going to come down very hard and it would stop you. Just leave now. And so we are now told that after this prayer of 7 times, the rain is about to come. Verse 45. Meanwhile, the sky has become dark with clouds. Understand this. Dark with clouds means what? If you remember, if this was the sea, and the sea itself, you can actually look from Mount Carmel, there will be dark clouds forming. Now, the way that we talk about dark clouds is that these would be what we call rain clouds. Well, I guess technically this would be the nimbus clouds. But this is an indication of rain. And it's building up. And then we are also told that the wind started to blow. And the wind is blowing it towards the land. And so if this was the land and this was Mount Carmel, and this guy was actually looking at it, so the wind is blowing inward. So what you find is this would be the west wind. And when there is a west wind, it brings moisture. And so we are now told that there was a heavy shower, and Achav rode and went to Jezreel. Jezreel is a place which is further inland. And so if you have the brook here, Brook Kidron, Jezreel this is Mount Carmel. Jezreel is inside. And so Achav would be riding his chariot, and he would be riding towards Jezreel. As the rain is blowing inland. And so as he went, we are now told, if you think about it, Achav is alone. Because the background was he and Obadiah was split up. One went south, one went north, and Obadiah met up with Elijah. Elijah said he wants to meet Achav, and here they met at Mount Carmel. And so Achav is going back to Jezreel, a town there, by himself. We are now told in verse 46, and then the hand of the Lord was on Elijah. Now, the hand of the Lord literally means the strength of God. So the hand of the Lord is the strength of Jehovah. In the Hebrew language, hand is about authority, about might, about strength. And it was upon Elijah. And he belted his cloak around his waist and outran Ahav to Jezreel. And so we need to explain this before we end. Girded his loins. I think that would be a better way of looking at this. This word here is girded his loins. And it gives us a picture of a person who is about to tie up the clothes around his loins and he is about to run. That is the picture. Girded his loins. Although the English here says belted his cloak around his waist, it really means girded his loins. Now, the next word here of interest is this. It says that he outran. Uh, the word here really means he ran ahead. Right? This word here, outran, literally means to dash ahead to Jezreel, which means that he was ahead, and that would be Elijah. So, two things would come to mind as we draw a close. Number one, there is a supernatural event here that Elijah by himself would not be able to do this. Elijah isn't young, and to do this requires divine powers or divine strength. And so Elijah had the hand of God on him. He was given divine strength. And when he ran ahead of Achav's chariot. Now, how would a man his age outrun the chariot? Would be by divine means. Number two, why Elijah ran ahead is understood to be the fact that Ahav, as the king of Israel, had nobody as a forerunner. And Elijah became his forerunner to announce his arrival. And in so doing, gives us this picture that Ahav has turned around to see the power of God and has accepted that God is Elohim and not Baal. And all his prophets had died. And Elijah has succeeded to demonstrate the divine power and even at this time ran ahead of him. So that would be the picture in verse 46. By divine strength, he outran Ahav to be his forerunner to announce his presence at Jezreel. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.